the ones that I set up and use for these trainings as well whenever I need to try out things with Dynamics 365 and try out the latest versions. On Dynamics Learning Portal, 3 courses available, 3 resources, the introduction, the customization, and the configuration that I was talking about. So these are kind of some of the prerequisites I'll be good to look over. So you can always go in there and see the full material on the Dynamics Learning Portal. So you'll have access to all the material, everything on there. All right, so what are we going to be talking about? Well, today we have session 1, and we'll be going through the introduction to configuration in Dynamics 365, and we will also be having a more detailed look at the security model that's being used with business units, teams, and users. Then on Wednesday, we'll be looking at hierarchical security and an introduction to processes and the business process flows that are available. Then come next week, we'll have an introduction to solutions and solution management and how those work. And we'll also look at entity and field customization basics at that time. Also next week, we'll be looking at some additional field customizations and looking at the relationships between entities. And then in the last week, we'll look at customizing forms and creating business rules. And finally, on the last session, we'll look at views and visualizations, as well as some mobile considerations, both for Dynamics 365, and then finally, we'll look at some integration options between Dynamics 365 and Office 365. All right, so let's get on it. Enough talking about what we're going to be talking about. Let's get on with it. And as mentioned, if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to just type them into the conversation window, and I'll get to them as fast as possible. All right, so we have the module 1 here, overview of Dynamics 365 and configuration. What is it actually that we're talking about? Obviously, CRM, which is not really even called any longer, is short for an acronym for Customer Relationship Management. And out of the box, Dynamics 365 does offer sales, marketing, service solutions, everything that's built on the flexible framework that it offers. And you can use that off the shelf, even though that's not as common, but you can, of course, tailor to meet the specific and unique requirements for each individual business, which is what this class is about. Another term that's being heard on occasion is XRM, where the X basically can mean anything, so kind of anything relationship management. So what is this configuration that we're talking about? And that's making the basic changes to the presentation and the functionality and all the tracking of details in Dynamics 365, including goals, languages, data management, email configurations, etc. And I like to say configurations is basically everything that we can achieve with pointing and clicking in the interface, and without having to do any kind of code. So why is it important to learn what all this built-in functionality is prior to starting a customization and configuration? You want to understand those items, look at all the processes, process tracking, automation, what kind of workflows, dialogues, everything else that's available. Look at some of the client-side customizations and business rule, roll-up fields, calculated fields. What features are there actually to work with? And some of the nice thing about knowing these, being up to date on all these certifications and taking the latest classes is that a lot of these features were features that had to be developed or coded. You have to implement additional scripts in order to achieve the functionality that comes out of the box now, that you can then just meet requirements just by doing configurations rather than doing development. We're going to look at the user experience and how people access Dynamics 365. There's all different options. We have the web client, we have the Outlook client that people can use. Then there's some options for phones and tablets. And finally, you could potentially build an entirely custom client. We don't see that very often, but it is possible. Now, with the web client, there's a number of supported browsers that's good to remember, and those are Internet Explorer 10 and 11, and Microsoft Edge are supported. When it comes to Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, and Apple Safari, as you probably know, those browsers get updated pretty much constantly and silently in the background. So Microsoft is basically just supporting the latest version that's out for those items. They don't specify exactly which version of Google Chrome or which version of Firefox they support. They just support the latest version. Whereas for Internet Explorer, the currently supported versions are 10 and 11. The Outlook client, we do have the traditional Outlook client that some of you probably been working with in the past. It's been around since I started with CRM in version 1.2, also using the Outlook client. That's over 10 years ago, so it's been around for over 11 years, and that can synchronize CRM records or Dynamics 365 records with your Outlook folders, and it can provide some offline capability for you as well. What's newer, coming out here in the last year or so, is the app for Outlook that you can install as well. There's no client really to install. It works both in Outlook and in the Outlook web access, so it works online too on Outlook.com, and you can download it directly or install it directly from within Dynamics 365. All right, so the mobile version, there we have tablets and phone apps available. And on the tablet, you have the apps, and you can create dashboards. You have offline drafts. You can open information in a browser. You have some options for doing offline search, as well as the application for the phone have some options for setting those up too. We'll get back in more detail for the mobile applications. I'll just refer to them here as we also have the tablet and phone app options in order to access Dynamics 365. But a couple other client options. Probably the one that most of you have heard about is the Unified Service Desk, which is a desktop application, and it connects to Dynamics 365. It's another line of business application, and you can connect it to a lot of other applications as well. So you can have multiple concurrent sessions, a lot of configurations done within Dynamics 365. Or of course you could create your own completely custom client as needed. So the standard options are not the only ways of accessing CRM. All right, so let's get on with basics there and look at the Dynamics 365 security model and the objectives for this specific module. So that's actually what we're going to be spending the rest of the class on here today. And we'll get an overview of the security model, how we create, configure, and manage those security roles. We'll look at users and teams security roles and how they play into each other. And we'll be looking at creating and managing Dynamics 365 business units. And we'll look at user management and email configuration, because they're also related to security. And then we'll look at teams and access team and extending the functionality that is in CRM and some configuration of Dynamics 365. So the purpose of the security model is it does a lot more than providing just access to records. It also defines the type of access that you can take on the individual records, so based on who the user is and who actually owns the records. And it can also be used to control access to the different UI elements. So the specific forms, specific dashboards. You can also tie them to the various business process flows. And you can also assign security roles to those items and limit who has access to what. You can also control a lot of extra additional features, like who can use the mobile app, who can go offline in Outlook, who can export to Excel, who can print information. You can kind of determine how much access people actually have to the data and how easy it is for them actually to pull out the data and run away with it, basically. Maybe you do have people that you don't want to be able to basically copy your entire customer database, or not necessarily just a customer, but this could also be patient information, for example, that, if you don't have any reason to export and analyze the data, well, there's absolutely no reason for you that you should be able to export patient history from a hospital CRM database, for example, and take that with you. And of course, the security model can also be used to simplify the user experience, simply by, if you don't have access to entities that you're not using, they will not be displayed in the user interface. So you'll have a simpler, easier to use interface and make it easier for everyone. And that's one of the things that we all can also do with the security roles. Dynamics 365 does come with a number of out-of-the-box security roles, or default security roles, and they kind of usually cover the most basic items, the most common roles in each of the organizations, like salesperson, sales manager, sales executive, and so on. And of course, they can be modified to fit your specific needs. So you can basically just take those and modify them as needed. You don't have to create them from scratch every single time. One exception to being able to modify those roles is the system administrator role, which cannot be modified. And you also need at least one user with a system administrator role, because you need at least one system administrator in the system who can log in and make changes and have rights to the system, and basically set up other users as well and give them roles. Now, you can also create new roles from scratch, even though I just mentioned you don't have to. You can copy the existing roles and just edit them to fit your specific needs. And that's also accessed through the settings, security, and security roles module or section of Dynamics 365. Now, one of the benefits of copying an existing role and just editing it, as opposed to creating a new role from scratch, is that there's a lot of permissions and privileges in those roles on entities that you're probably not thinking about, that are just basic permissions needed in order to operate it within the system. So it's usually good to take one of the smaller roles, like salesperson, and then just modify that for the specific needs, rather than trying to create a new role from scratch. We'll go into more details on how role layering works a little bit later here today. So I'll give you some examples of how that can work. With role-based security, so within each of those roles, the security permissions or privileges are defined at the entity and record level. So meaning that every role includes a complete list of actions that can be performed on each entity. So you basically have, within the role, you have information about which entities, and at the record level, what you can do with those records. There's also a lot of task level items. I mentioned those a little bit, about the ability to export, the ability to go offline, which are really more like yes, no access levels on what you can do. Also printing, merging, running your own workflows, and so on. All those permissions are tied to a specific role. So the privileges is kind of really the name of the individual permission or action that you're allowed to do. So it's kind of the most granular component of security roles that you can work with in Dynamics 365. And they define, the combination of those define what you as a user can do on each entity and in each record in the system. So for example, the privilege is what allows you to create contacts, it's what allows you to read accounts, update invoices, delete cases, associate contacts with accounts, etc. The privileges that are found in each of those roles, it says common privileges found, but for each entity, these are the privileges that you have: to create, read, write, delete, append to, assign, and share. So most of these are pretty obvious. One item that I tend to get a little bit confused on are the two append privileges, the append and the append to. So append says here I can attach this entity to other records, and append to means you can attach other other records to this entity. Whenever I'm like looking in the system and looking at different roles and I can't remember what's append and append to, which way they go, I just like to put the word me behind it. So I can say append me. So if I'm looking at, say, contacts, I can append me to another record, like account, for example. So you can append this to another record. On the other hand, the append to me means that you can append other records to me, like activity. So still on the contact, append to me means I can append activities to me, for example. So I kind of just put that in there as a filler that helps me remember the difference between append and append to. So basically just putting me behind it, append me or append to me. All right, so the access levels. So the access levels work in conjunction with the privileges. So the privileges indicate what actions a user can perform on that we just talked about. The access levels determines which records that you have privileges to do that action on. So those access levels are determined on a combination of record ownership and the business unit which the user belongs to. So this is really where we're determining the access levels is what determines your organization-wide, your business unit-wide, or your user-wide privileges, for example. So let's have a closer look at the access levels and what that means, because we have here all the different access level types. There's none. We'll start at the bottom. We have none, user, business unit, PowerShell BU that we can go through. And they determine what records that you have access to. And notice here on this image, the boxes there with group, business unit, marketing, sales, support, projects, those are all individual business units. And finally, we have the little user icon down here. So the first option, of course, is none, meaning that you don't have access to any records for this specific entity. So if you had none on account, you could not read, see anything, do anything with accounts. The user access level means that you have access to all the records within that's basically assigned to you, that you are the owner of. Or if it's assigned specifically to a team that you are a member of. But only something where you have directly been assigned or own that specific record, which would include all the records that you created. So I just saw we had a question here. So append on contacts and append to an accounts. Yes, for the connection between contacts and accounts, you will put append on contacts and append to on the account. That is correct. All right, so next up is the business unit privileges. So in this case, where I'm the member of the business unit projects, all records that are owned within projects, I'll have access to. So if I have a colleague who's also a member of the same business unit projects, or maybe I have 5 other colleagues who are all in the same business unit projects, I will have access to all the records that they own. But if another person within say the marketing team in the marketing business unit have access to records, I'll not be own some records. I will not have access to seeing those because I'm in a different business unit. I only have the business unit level access, so only in the business unit that I am assigned to myself. With the parent-child business unit, so let's say I'm in the sales business unit, and I have 2 child business units from there, support and projects. Basically meaning I have access to everything in those lower levels. However, I will still not have access to anything in marketing and service because I'm not associated specifically with them. And finally, there's the organization-wide setting. That just means that you have access to everything. Every record that's been created here, you have access to. So this is also the simplest one to use, also the least restrictive. And in terms of assigning those security roles, because they have to be assigned to an individual, you can assign them to a single user or a specific team. And you can do that using manage roles from the user view within the specific user record. You can also do it for multiple users and multiple teams. So if you're looking at your list of enabled user, you can click off 5, 10, 15, up to 250 of them, as many as you want, and click manage roles, and then you can add roles to them. The big difference is that if you take a single user, you can say, okay, this person already has a sales manager role, and you can uncheck it. And then now that person wouldn't have that role any longer once you save it. If you added multiple roles for multiple users in one go, so you select 10 users and you start checking off box and click OK, all of those roles will be added to those users. However, they will keep all of those roles that they already had in addition to what you gave them. So the existing roles are not shown because they can vary from user to user. So that's kind of just something to keep in mind if you are managing roles for multiple users in bulk. Just keep in mind that you cannot remove anything. You still have to verify that they only have the kind of roles that they need. I got another question here. How do append and append to work in line with the connection role? So the connection role is its own entity. So the append and append to privileges work in the same manner on the connection role. However, the connection role by itself has nothing to do with the connections in Dynamics 365. So I'm assuming this question is regarding to the connections, how when you can connect, say, a specific contact as a stakeholder to an opportunity. Those are completely a different area, has nothing to do with the security role. You still need the proper permissions and privileges in order to be able to add connections between items. But the append to and append to privileges just means how you relate the different entities. So if you're allowed to relate the different entities to each other and in which direction in the hierarchy. All right, so teams and security roles, because you can assign a security role to a team. You have to be a bit careful when you do that, though. A security role can be required if you use teams to own records. So if you have like a support desk team that owns cases, for example, it can be good to have a team, and that team must have some security roles in order to be able to own that record. And a team, of course, since it has a security role, must also belong to a business unit and can of course only belong to one business unit. However, the team members doesn't have to come from the same business unit, they can come from any business unit. So as soon as you have a team, you can put users in it, doesn't matter what business unit they're in, regardless of what business unit the team has. Now, the important part is that the user and team security roles will be combined, so users get the least restricted access level for that record type and privileges. And I just want to highlight the term there because it keeps confusing me, the least restricted access level. So I have my user record, I'm the member of a team. Dynamics 365 will take my personal security roles and it'll take the security roles that are assigned to the team and combine those and give me the least restrictive, which also means the one with the most permissions. So it's kind of an accurate feature in terms of permission, and say so the team has access to cases. I don't have access to cases, but I have access to contacts, which the team doesn't. Combined, I have access to both of those. So I'm being less restrictive, of the least restrictive access level. And I got a question on access teams. Yes, this teams here is in context of ownership teams. Access team does not require a security role. And I'll cover access teams later as well here in this session today. So when working with multiple security rooms, of course, you can also have more than one security role per user or team. So whenever you assign that more than one role, it is the least restrictive access level that will apply. Again, in reverse, the one with the most permissions. So let's investigate how that actually works in practice. And we're looking here, for example, we have a security role, which is like a baseline role for all the different users. Users have full access to accounts, can write and assign their own accounts, and can read cases in their own business unit, for example. Then we add a salesperson role to it, and that salesperson role has access to opportunities, can read all opportunities in their own business unit, and can write and assign opportunities that that person owns specifically. So once those are combined, what really happens is that baseline role will get aggregated with all the permissions from the salesperson role. So you have that one role where you have access to the account, you have access to the opportunities, and you have access to the cases, and all those can get combined. So basically, you are less restricted in this manner. And same thing goes, you can actually apply this to more and more levels. So you can use 3, 4, 5, etc. However many roles it actually just makes sense for you to use. I like to keep the security roles as simple as possible and use fewer roles, just because somebody has to manage it. And if you have too many roles, I've seen organizations that have like 100 roles, trying to manage all of those and see who has access to what roles, and it tends to be messy when you work with so many roles. In this case, for example, we have the baseline, the salesperson, and the sales manager. And the sales manager also has full access to cases regardless of business unit, can write everything in their own business unit, has more access to the opportunities. And that really means that the effective permissions of the sales manager is now much less restricted, so they have much more permissions within Dynamics 365. So that's the layered approach, and using multiple roles in order to give people more and more permissions. One way of doing this and adding the sales manager on top of the salesperson is that you ensure that the sales manager can still do all the same things that the salesperson can do. So if you just need to give the sales manager additional permissions to something, you just do it on that role. If you need to give salesperson more permissions, you just add something in that role, and all the salespeople, including the sales manager, will automatically get access to it as well. Of course, you could also go ahead and take a non-layered approach to this. And by non-layered approach, I mean you would basically create a role for each of the different types. So here we have the salesperson role, which has the full access to account, organization level access to account, read access to all opportunities in their own business unit and all cases in their own business unit, whereas the sales manager clearly has much more access to those different entities. And you would just have to apply one role or the other. You wouldn't necessarily have to apply both roles for those different items, or for those different users. You would only apply one of them. All right, so we have a demo coming up. So let me just get that one ready. All right, and you should all be able to see my screen here. Dynamics 365. And hold on, apologies, just to make sure that I can see any comments along the way on a different screen here. All right, so I want to demo the different security roles and the relevant settings. And first, I just logged into a trial of Dynamics 365. And first of all, I'll go to the menu and go to the settings section and go to security. Here, and then find the specific security roles. There you go. And see, we already have a lot of security roles here. So these are all the roles that come out of the box. Some of these, especially when you start off a trial now, it also includes the solution for project service and field service and so on. So we do see a couple of extra roles in here, like field service administrator, field service app access. But aside from those, most of these are the original out-of-the-box roles, like salesperson and sales manager. So schedule manager, system administrator, the one I mentioned, there's always needs to be at least one person who has the system administrator role in the system. The salesperson role is generally the one that has the fewest permissions of any of the roles. So if you give somebody this role, that's probably the person who can do the fewest things in the system, have the least amount of access, depending on what they're doing. There's also some customer service representative access, which is fairly restricted as well. But let's go have a look at the salesperson role and look at the different privileges. You can open up the role here, and we always have the key at the bottom. I'll click on the tab Call Records, and we can see what people actually have access to. Specifically on account, you can see that I can only create accounts for myself. However, I can read all the accounts in the system. I can write on all accounts in the system. I can only delete my own accounts, and I can only assign my own accounts as well. So I can, for example, I got a message here that's a few people. I'm definitely getting a message here that I am sharing my screen, so you guys should be able to see it. So notice the combination there of assigning is only my own, and deleting is only my own records. So basically that means that I can't take somebody else's account and assign it to myself. I would need somebody else with more permissions in order to do that, in order to take over a specific account, for example. That also means I can't delete somebody else's account because it has to be assigned to me before I can do that. Even it was business unit level on assign. For example, if I change this and said business unit level privileges on assign, means as if my coworker, who's also a salesperson, in the same business unit, I could actually take his accounts, assign them to myself, and then delete them. I can't just take some of his accounts and delete them because I don't have permissions to do that. But in this case, I could actually assign them to myself first, and then I would get permissions to delete them. So of course we don't want to do that. I don't see why anybody would do that, but you want to make sure that that you can keep an eye on that. And Shelley, I'm getting some information on technical issues here. I know, is everything working for you? All right, should be all good. So the same thing goes for opportunities that you can see here with the delete permissions. And notice actually when we scroll down, my key up here, create, read, write, delete, and everything disappears, which can be a little frustrating because once I've scrolled down and say I actually want to change something on opportunity, I can't see exactly what's what. But as long as you just hover the mouse over there, you actually see the explanation of what this specific item is. Item is that you can actually change all of the settings in one go just by clicking on the entity name. It makes it a little easier if you want to change a lot of things in one go. But you have to change everything at the same time, so now I can't really get back to where it was without redoing the whole thing. And you can do the same thing here with the read permissions, that you can change all the permissions for all the records in one go. I generally wouldn't recommend doing that because I have not yet seen a situation where it makes sense to manage across entities in this manner. I think it makes more sense in this sense, and click on account and change all the permissions for those in one go. So I'll just close out this window here and not save my changes, and then open up, for example, the CEO Business Manager instead. I will look at those roles here. I'll go to the call records, and we can see this person definitely has a lot more access to all of the different entities that we had before. And the same thing goes in the bottom, where I have the miscellaneous privileges. These are all the task level permissions that was referred to. So up here we're talking about the different access levels, and entity permissions. These are different task level items that we can talk to and specify permissions for. So in this case, like bulk delete, publish email templates, can they use OneDrive for Business, can they view the audit history, and so on. And all the records are broken into call records, marketing specific items for campaign list, sales, service, everything here is broken out so you can manage those items separately. For example, with service, you have the approved knowledge articles, published knowledge items, business management. Business management is where you find a lot of the items that people like to restrict sometimes, like the ability to use phones, go offline in Outlook, print the items, export to Excel. If you don't want people to run away with your whole system in either Outlook or Excel, you can basically just turn off these two items. Including mail merge. Mail merge would effectively allow you to take a lot of the system out in an automated form, because you could just print a lot of letters with different addresses with the information you need from the records. So you can manage all of those things here, including customizations and all the different access processes that you're allowed to run. Everybody does need some access to processes and process sessions, otherwise they won't be able to create workflows, for example. Not necessarily create workflows, but also run workflows, including automatically triggered workflows. So that's one of the good reasons why you would have the salesperson role in there. Oh, and there's one that's called missing entities. That's a new one. I've actually never seen this one before until Dynamics 365. To me, it looks like entities that has been, and this changes a little bit. I had another Dynamics 365 instance where I removed field service and project service from it. And it actually had a lot more of the entities in here from, I think it was field service. So whenever it looks like whenever the security role have permissions on entities which are no longer in the system, are not currently in the system, then they're here in the missing entities item. Good question. That's a new feature. It always shows up on the trial environment. I'm not sure if it will show up on a completely blank and fresh environment, but it might depend on your roles as well. Now, of course, the business process flows, which ones do you have access to? So you can actually manage that from in here from the items as well. Notice, for example, the one that you've probably seen the most if you're playing out with trials is phone to case opportunity sales process. So you can determine who actually has access to these different items and who can read them. So you can manage that from in a central location instead of actually having to go to the business process flow itself and manage it. And finally, we have all the custom entities. So in this case, this is all the field service, project service items, but all the entities that you create, and of course we'll get back to creation of custom entities too. You will also have to assign permissions for your users to come in and use those. So you can see all the details in here and start adding permissions to people to use them. So the layered approach that I was talking about and how that works is, let me just get out of the security roles here. So with the different permissions, I could actually create an additional role. Let me just create a new one and just do a few things, for example, and I can call this one export to Excel, and I'm actually only going to give it one permission there, export to Excel, because that one was not on the salesperson role. They're not allowed to export to Excel. But let's say we do have a few salespeople that we want to export to Excel. I want to have the ability to export to Excel as well, but we don't want to give them any more permission than that. So basically just the salesperson plus exporting to Excel. So now I have those roles. So I'll go to security and my user list, and select one of my users and click on manage roles up here. See, this guy actually already has a lot of roles. I'll remove those because I can do that when there's only managing one. So I'll leave the salesperson role there. Make sure we have the salesperson. And then I'll use the export to Excel and say, okay, so now this user only have those two roles, salesperson plus export to Excel. So basically now this guy can do both of those items. So it's in a very simple form. That is a layout approach. And we can actually see the roles up here. Oops, that was field security profiles. We need to go to security roles. So we can see the roles here that the person has. So now this guy can log in, do everything the salesperson can, but he can also export to Excel. So in simple form, that's the layout approach to it. So the more roles I add, the more layers there are to the security roles. All right. So I will get back to the slide deck. Just give me 1 second. All right, and we'll talk a little bit about business units. Here, because they, as you could see here, the different organization, parent, child, business unit setting, everything relates to ownership of the records and the business units of those records, at least the business unit that the owner is in. So the business units are used in with the users, teams, and security roles. So security, which means basically the data access, including reports, everything is defined by the security role access level. And whenever you create a new Dynamics 365 instance, you get one business unit by default. That's the root business unit. And in the beginning, it also has the same name as the organization. So if you go to the trial link that was in the beginning of the slide deck, and you create a new trial and you call it, this is my trial instance, whatever. The business unit name will be, this is my trial instance, whatever. And so you have that in there. To that, you can add a number of child business units, and they'll all be linked in a hierarchy. You can create a separate business unit by itself and say, this is just going to be in its own hierarchy over here. Everything has to be linked in a hierarchy to the root business unit. So it's kind of similar to an organization chart where you have the CEO or the owner at the top, and then everything just trails down from under there. You don't have to replicate your organizational chart. Some people tend to do that because, oh, we have sales, we have marketing, we have project management and project services and what's going on. But you should really think of not necessarily have the business unit in terms of the organizational hierarchy, but in the hierarchy of how you want your security settings to work based on the ownership of the different records. Those two are not necessarily the same, even though it's easy to go ahead and just say, okay, we're going to create a marketing business unit, we're going to create a sales business unit. Sales and marketing generally do want access to and visibility into the same records because they're both trying to, help out with the same group of customers and leads. So yeah, create only the business unit that you do need to meet the security roles, not necessarily just to meet your organizational hierarchy. So let's have an example here of a business unit hierarchy. We have the root business unit, AdventureWorks Cycles. And just highlight there that you can rename this business unit. I think that came with version 23rd here in the last few years. That became possible. I've seen a few instances back from version 1.2, version 3, I think also CRM4, where you could not change the root business unit, and the original setup, somebody had made a typo and it was just always wrong and there was no way it could be changed. But you can rename it now, which is nice. You cannot disable or delete it. It's a root business unit. It has to be there. And you cannot move it, so you cannot change it to a different position in the hierarchy. Under this, you have the child business units. You can rename them, you can disable them, you can delete them, and they have to be in that order. You cannot delete an active business unit. You have to disable it first. And you can move them around to a new parent business unit, for example. Then we have additional some additional child business unit here, for example, channel sales, consumer sales, support, projects, etc. And one thing that has kind of been considered best practice, depending on if you have a feeling that the organizational hierarchy, you might want to make changes to it in the future, instead of just having the default business unit as the root business units at the top, you could actually just call that one root business unit, create another business unit right below it called Adventure Work Cycle, and then create your hierarchy under that one. Because if you ever wanted to move your top business unit to a different place in the hierarchy, you would have the ability to do that at this point. So if you have a very complex setup, you think this might need to make some significant changes to this business unit's position in the future, just creating that substitute top business unit right under the root business unit could be an option to do that. All right, user management and checking up on the user credentials. Active Directory or Office 365 usually handles or will handle authentication of the user. So basically your name and password. That's not something that happens directly within Dynamics 365. That is really happened by Microsoft Online Services. So if you're using Dynamics 365 Online and you have a username and a password, so basically when you go to your this is my trial.crm.dynamics.com, you type in your login and username and password, that is your Office 365 credentials that you're using, and they'll authenticate you, make sure that you're you. You know the drill. If you're like travel to a different country or use a different computer, sometimes they'll ask you some additional questions. So they'll authenticate you and lock you in. If you're on-premise, or if you're federated with Exchange on-premise, you can use Active Directory, and they'll authenticate you and make sure that you are who you say you are, and then lock you into the system. So, but after you sign in, that's when the Dynamics 365 security model is used to control access within the application. So when it comes to user management and authentication, approval, people having access to the system, just keep in mind that access to the system itself, or the authentication of who you say you are, is handled either by Active Directory or Office 365 Online to authenticate you. But as soon as you have been authenticated, that's when the security model kicks in and then determines what inside Dynamics 365 that you have access to. So those are two different layers there. And of course, the one that we're focusing on here is the Dynamics 365 security model. So once you've been authenticated and have access, then what do you have access to, or what actions can you actually perform within the application? So good things to keep in mind here is that you can disable users, effectively make sure that they cannot access Dynamics 365 any longer. However, you cannot delete users. They have to be in the system. They'll be a disabled user, so they'll not consume a license. Remember to remove a license in Office 365 too, but you cannot delete them. You can change a business unit to move a user or team, so you can switch those around. So you can say this guy's moving from sales to marketing. You can basically just point to the user and say, and it's actually a separate function, so you have to click the button that says change business unit, and it'll move that person to a different business unit. However, what happens when you move a user or team from one business unit to another is that all the security roles will be removed when you do it, because the security roles are all business unit specific, which is why they're being removed. So you have to determine or give that user or team a new set of security roles after the business unit move. If you forget to do it, and I have to, embarrassed to say that I still do it after plus 10 years of working with Dynamics CRM, it's always been like that, and sometimes I just still forget it. It's one of those things that, oh yeah, you have to go do that too. But just keep in mind, whenever you change the business unit on a user or team, that person cannot access CRM any longer, Dynamics 365 any longer, until you have added those business security roles back to them that they need, that are specific then to that new business unit. So with Dynamics 365, you can, as I mentioned, you can't federate with a local domain account. It does require your local Active Directory to be synchronized with Azure Active Directory, which is basically just the online version of Active Directory. And that also means you can federate and allow single sign-on with Dynamics 365. From a user experience perspective, that just means that the users, when they log on or type in the website of Dynamics 365, they don't have to log in. If they're already at the office working, they don't have to log in. They'll be logged in automatically. They may see the screen and just have to click OK in order to be able to get to the item. So it makes it a lot easier for them. Sometimes that can also be a little complicated for us who are consultants or the system administrators. Maybe sometimes they want to log in as a different role just to try things out. That can be a little difficult because they're already authenticated on the network and they'll be automatically logged in. But it is nice for the users that they don't have to deal with that as well. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going through a lot of the user security, user setup, a lot of the security modeling. There's another thing around the users that we haven't really talked about yet as much, and that is the email and the email configuration. So with the email configuration, you do have an email server profile, and that's where you can configure your the profiles that can be used with server-side synchronizations. And it's also where you can set up the default for an organization email settings, meaning the default setting is the default setting that will be applied to all the users that you create. So if you're saying one has to use a Microsoft Outlook client for email processing for both incoming and outgoing, then that's what's going to be applied to all the new users. If you set it up to being server-side synchronization on all of them, then that's what's going to be applied to all the new users. So you can determine the default settings here and the email configuration settings here. And if you are currently using the email router, you can migrate the current router settings to server-side synchronization. That's something that's worth looking into. I'm just going to mention that here, that is an option, and you can definitely find more information on that. It's not something that's part of this exam, so I'm not going to dive into it. But just keep in mind the email router, if you're using it, will be deprecated in the near future. You'll still be able to use it for a year or so, but it will be phased out in favor of server-side synchronization. So you'll have to make the switch eventually, and there are some tools there that can help you migrate your information from the your current router settings to the server-side synchronization, making that process a little bit easier in getting that set up. Now, an important part of the email configuration and getting that working is the mailbox entity. And the mailbox entity is something that each of the users and queues have that has been enabled for email. So they have to have that mailbox record. And that defines the email synchronization method for each user based on the default settings that I was just talking about. So the incoming, outgoing, appointments, contacts, tasks, how's that all being synchronized? We can see in the screenshot there the incoming email is for Outlook, outgoing email sets to server-side synchronization, or the email router, and appointment, contacts, and tasks is being maintained by CRM for Outlook. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that each mailbox record must be approved and must be tested and enabled before they can process any email. So keep that in mind, that just setting it up is not sufficient. You also have to approve it, and then you have to enable it. So creating it is not enough. It's 3 steps. You have to make sure that your setting synchronization methods are correct. You want to approve it, and then you want to test and enable it. Got a question here on what is a queue. We do have queues in CRM. We're not really talking much about them in this class. It's really part of the customer service class. Talking about like queues. They are different from teams. Users can also be member of different queues. But they're different from teams in the sense that they can actually manage emails. However, there are no security privileges assigned to queues, which is why I'm not really talking much about them here in this class. But you can kind of compare them to team. You can say you can have a support desk team. You can also have a support desk queue. However, a queue and the user member of queue do not have security roles. They do not belong to a specific business unit. So in that way, they vary a lot from team, whereas team can have security roles, and if you're a member of a team, you also adopt their security roles. However, what's different about queues is that they can actually manage and process emails. So queues will have a mailbox records as well in the same type as users can. So if you have an email, default email that's called like support@mycompany.com, you would could create a queue and set the email to support@mycompany.com and have the mailbox record for that queue process the incoming email and automatically create cases and so on. So the mailbox record here also applies to the queue. So users and queues, when enabled for email, must have a mailbox record. When I say must have a mailbox record, it's not something you could go create. It's something that'll be created automatically for you in the system. And then, of course, also for queues, has to be approved and has to be tested and enabled when you do that. All right, teams. I've already talked a bit about teams and security roles on teams, but what are teams themselves? I did talk just a little bit about saying how are they different from queues, because they do contain a number of users, so you can use that to aggregate a number of users. Teams can also own records, so you can manage security, reporting, sharing of records. Each business unit does have a default team that you cannot add or remove users from. However, everybody who's a member of that business unit is automatically also a member of that team. So keep that in mind. And you can actually take the team from a business unit and also assign a security role to it. However, be careful for that, because that means that everybody who becomes a member of that business unit automatically also gets that security role, unless you want it to be that way, of course. So it's a double-edged sword, because it automatically gives people a lot of privileges, or some privileges, but make sure that you want it that way, because that could be an easier way of maintaining the security as well. You can assign those security rules to teams, and of course the users can take advantage of whatever privileges the team has. And you can also work from the position of the team in the hierarchy of the records. Now we're getting to the team types, and we had a question on this earlier. Owner teams and access teams, of course. And owner teams means that multiple users can be a member of this, and teams can own records. And records of course can be owned by multiple users or individual users. So when a team owns the record, basically everybody who's a member of that team is then responsible for that record. Whereas access teams is used for granting specific permissions to individual records. So this is more sharing related. And access teams cannot own records. Only owner teams can own records and have security roles. So if you're a member of an access team, all it means is that a record is being shared with you. So there's some serve some very different purposes. So let's try and sum up on some of those changes there. The owner teams means that when a record is owned by a group of users instead of just an individual user, generally it's good to know the number of teams, or at least be close to the number of teams at the same time. And of course, when you need to report on progress by teams, when that's required. So when you have like a defined group of people, that's when you want to use the own teams, and they need to own records, and you can take advantage of like sharing records with the teams, taking advantage of having security roles on the team, the fact that they can own those records and you can use it in your statistics, as opposed to the access teams, which is when you have something that's much more dynamic. You form them, you dissolve them. It's something that's generally temporary. And you don't necessarily need to know the number of teams at the same time. It kind of happens on the fly. And team members can require kind of different access rights to records. And some users can require access to a single record without necessarily requiring ownership. But using access teams is a good way of keeping it. Instead of just sharing the records with each user individually, you can use access teams to make it more visible on who this record has actually been shared with. So let me try and do a demo of that and show some of the features around this. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen again. All right, and there's actually two types of access teams that you can use. One of them is you just create a team and you call it an access team, and the other one is an automatically created access team which are entity specific. I'm going to show you both of them so you can see what the difference is and how you would use them. And also, you can also better visualize in what context you would be using these. So let me go ahead. Let's see, I am sharing. And let me go ahead and go to settings and security because I want to get to the teams. So the difference between sharing of the record and the access team, just got a question on that. I'll set up a team here, and then I'll go to a specific record, and then I'll highlight the difference between the two. So I can go ahead and say I'll create a new team. And I'll create an exam prep access team. Normally I wouldn't actually have to call it access team because that name would be in the team type. So I'll change this from owner to access. I'll go ahead and save this record. And then I can add team members. I'll just add some here just so we can see it. I'll make Jon Snow and myself a member. There we go. So we now have two members of this access team. That's basically all there is to it. I now have an exam prep access team with two members. So let's say I'm working on an opportunity. So I'll go to opportunities here, and I'll say this one, video hardware upgrade. It's currently owned by system. Let's say I wanted to share this one with the exam prep access team, because I might do that multiple times. Whenever I need people to help me out with something, I know that this team can come help me. So I'll just share it with the exam prep access team. So I'll go ahead and say share. And I'll say add user or team. I'll switch to team here. I'll have the access team. And just go ahead and share with the records. I can share and define what kind of access they actually should have to this opportunity. Just go ahead and say share, and now that record is automatically shared with them. The other way of the record is done is saying instead of sharing with somebody individually, I could just have come in here and selected the individuals directly instead. But of course, with larger corporations, you have a lot more than two users in there. You have hundreds, thousands. So you can have these teams that you can automatically share with, making that process a lot easier. The other hand, you can also set up workflows that does that automatically. On the other hand, the other thing that you can do is creating an auto-created access team. That happens on the specific record itself. So let me show you that. I'll go here to Customize Entity. Let me see, did it open? Oh, came up on another screen. We have the entity here. So notice here under communication and collaboration, we have an access teams option there. So I can enable the access team. So when enabled means I can create on the form, I can create a lookup to access team where I can just add individuals to this specific record to whom it should be shared with. So let's try and do that. This one's already enabled, so I don't have to save and publish. But you do come into the customizations here on the settings, and I'm on the opportunity, communication and collaboration. You can check off access team. So I believe it was already checked off, so I don't have to do that. And I did actually not mean to change this yet. I wanted to go to the form and actually show you how to add that piece. All right, so I'll open up the opportunity form. And we'll get back to more form information. So I'm just going through these steps quickly because we'll be covering form customizations in a later session. So I just want to make sure that we can just add the access team here. We got a section there. I'll just call that call it share with these users. Auto access team. There we go. And then I'll add a subgroup and select all record types and users. Enable users. There we go. Team, say OK, and save and publish. All right, and hopefully it'll let me click publish any moment now. There we go. All right, so when I'll now go to the opportunity record afterwards, we'll be able to see this additional subgroup where I can add the users to the auto-created access team that's being automatically created for each opportunity just to specify who should have access to this record. So, for example, if I have some opportunities and salespeople, or let's say pre-sales engineers or service people don't actually have access to opportunities because they shouldn't. There's no reason for them to see it unless they're being specifically asked to help out on an individual opportunity. So you could create these access team where the salespeople can just basically pull in these service reps just by putting their name on adding their name to the form. They don't have to go in and share it and do anything like that. And then you can create views for the service reps that they can see all the different opportunities that they've been added to where the salesperson is asking for help. All right, and hopefully this will publish any second now. I'm sorry, apparently it's getting late here. It's taking a little longer. Well, not a little, a lot longer than usual. That's typical when you're doing demos and screen sharing. Then that happens. So I just basically wanted to come back and review that on the form itself. I'm sorry, I'm just checking my slides. I don't want to make sure we don't run out of time because of this. All right, let's try it. All right, there we go. So you can see who has actually been shared with us. I actually already shared it with the the group there and this opportunity. So you can see, I can actually just pull in. I don't have any more people in here, but you can just pull in the information or add users to those different teams, and they'll get access to the opportunities as needed. All right, let me get back to the deck. Oops. All right, there we go. All right, enough about teams. So what are some of the areas where we can configure Dynamics 365? We have the administration settings, the business management settings, data management settings, the document management settings, and some collaboration settings. So we'll go through some of those. And we have the administration settings, where most of the Dynamics 365 settings are done on the organization itself. That's also where you get access to the system settings, which have a lot of those features. Now, the administration settings, whenever you go to this panel under Settings and Administration, see here that we can see System set. We have Settings, Administration there, and System Settings we have available here. The only items that you can see are the ones that you actually have access to. So if you don't have access to any of these, and you go to Settings Administration, you probably won't see anything in here. A lot of these settings are, of course, not something that you change a whole lot. That's something that you change in the beginning of a project or during the beginning of an implementation. It's all set up, and then you kind of leave it there. The business management settings and the configurations in there are more related to the, oh, sorry, I clicked too fast. So these relate to the ongoing business operations. So it's generally also something that you set in the beginning stages of a project during an implementation, and then you can update them or tweak them as you find out that you need more details. You need to make some tweaks to the fiscal year settings. You need to change some business closures, make some updates to the sales territories or goal metrics or currencies and so on. But generally something that you set up in the beginning, and then you just make minor modifications as you go along. The rights to do that's also something that you can manage within the security role. So you can actually assign, it doesn't have to be a system administrator, you can assign other individuals to perform some of these tasks. And in data management, that's also where you identify and manage the duplicate detection rules, duplicate records, duplicate detection jobs, duplicate detection settings. The data maps, you can also create there. So when you import, if you import the same spreadsheet over and over again, you can create a map, save those. You can also bulk delete records based on specific criteria. And of course, you can turn on and off the sample data, which by default, when you set up a new trial in online, all the sample data is enabled by default. So you can come in here in the data management section and turn it off. Data management and duplicate detection. Rule of thumb, avoid duplicate detection rules that are too generic because they can seriously frustrate users. So for example, like I'm going over the top here, but don't create a duplicate detection rule based on similar first name or first name and last name, because there's a lot of people that generally have the first and last name. So email address is generally pretty good. You can create duplicate detection jobs and they can be scheduled, but they can run at a minimum of every 7 days. So you can come and see how many duplicates you might have in the system, or up to 300 and every 365 days. The data import feature that's in data management is pretty good for small volume. So if you have I think over 100,000 records is probably going to take too long to be using the data import feature. 50,000 is even going to take, 5-6 hours or something. But small volume files like a salesperson spreadsheet with all their contacts and accounts and so on, those can very efficiently be imported using the data import feature on the data management. A nice trick too is that if you have multiple files, CSV files with both contacts, accounts, and cases, and so on, you can upload all of those in one go by zipping them into one file, and then then Dynamics 365 during the import process will actually handle any potential relationships between those records. And a couple of the supported forms are text files, comma separated, so it has to be a CSV file, and of course the XML spreadsheets, which are generated from Dynamics 365, so you can export them and re-import them as well. A rule of thumb there is that you cannot exceed 8 megabytes in size of those files. It has to be less than 8 megabytes in order for you to be able to upload them. On auditing, that can be enabled and disabled. It's always disabled by default, so whenever you set up a trial, it's not enabled. You have to go in and enable it. So it does not take effect until you actually go in and turn it on into the auditing settings under settings. Somebody's asking how you can upload more than 8 megabytes. So this is 8 megabytes per file. So you could just break it into multiple files, but if you have more files than that, if you have a spreadsheet that's more than 8 megabytes, you have so many records, it's going to take days to import anyway using the data import service. So the one option is to use the new data loader service that's in preview. They'll help you import a lot of those records really fast if it's fairly simple information. If you have complex data, you may want to look into using some third-party tools like Kingswaysoft or Scribe or something that uses an SSIS integration into Dynamics 365. Completely out of the scope for this exam, but I'm just mentioning you that you definitely have other options for importing more information on there. Yes, the data loader service is specifically for Dynamics 365 Online. If you're on-premise, you would have to use tools like Kingswaysoft or Scribe or another tool to do the import. However, I don't think you are may not be impacted by the 8 megabyte limit if you're on-premise. So you might have some other advantages there, and it's probably not going to take us long on-premise either. All right, document management is also under settings, and that's where you configure the integration with SharePoint for document management. So all entities, or most entities, can allow SharePoint when it's enabled, and all the configured entities have a document section. So there's actually a section on the form where you can go to documents and see all the documents that's related to this specific record in SharePoint. So it's basically just opening a window to SharePoint where you can work with your files and take advantage of all those SharePoint features. The integration is limited to document libraries, but developers can definitely extend it more as needed. So let me show those last two things there, auditing and duplicate detection. So I'll go ahead and share my desktop again. And there you go. So I'll go to settings, and we'll start out with auditing. It's down here. So from here we can go into entity and field audit settings. I'll open up the solution manager. I can specify specifically which entities and which fields we want to audit. The most important part there is the global audit settings. And we can come in and review, and we can say start auditing. And notice here we have the common entities, sales entities, marketing entities, etc. You can specify common entities. Notice here you can just basically hover your mouse over it so you can see which one. So account is a common entity, for example. Contact is a common entity. Go down to sales, you can see what those entities are. Those are competitor, opportunity, etc. So if you just want to like do the most common things for sales, common entities, just check those boxes off. Otherwise, you can of course go into the solution manager and do it correctly. But for example, symbol like contact and account, it's all under common entities. So just check off common entities, and you start auditing on account, for example. All right, the other section here was data management and duplicate detection. So we'll go here first here, go to the duplicate detection settings. So yeah, you do have, there's a question on the audit log and whether or not you can download the files for future analysis. You do have access to the files for analysis, so you do have access to them. I actually don't recall if you can download them directly from the interface, but you can definitely get access to them and look at those. So the duplicate detection settings, by the way, just as I'm summing up on that question, with the audit process log, you can also get access and see, like, for example, deleted records and so on. So that's being audited as well. So even though you're missing the records, you still have information about them in the audit logs. But onto duplicate detection and duplicate detection settings. So you can see here that specifies when the duplicate detection is actually running. So when a record is either created or updated, when Microsoft Dynamics 365 Outlook goes offline to online, so when it starts synchronizing new information and potentially creates new records, and during data import. So if you're importing a spreadsheet full of 1,000 contacts, do you want to make sure that it doesn't import anything that applies to the duplicate detection rules? So there, when something's created or updated, Outlook goes from offline to online, and during data import are the triggers that can start a duplicate detection. And you can see those in here. So for the duplicate detection rules, you can come in here and specify what the rules should be. And of course, a rule has to be published in order for it to work. So for example here, contacts, this is a good one. Contacts with the same email address. Generally, that is a good indicator of a duplicate contact. So you can come in here and specify, say, email is an exact match, then it's a duplicate. And in this case, I would highly recommend checking off ignore blank values, because otherwise all contacts with no email address will be considered duplicates, and it's going to remind you every single time. So see here, we can say if account is an exact match, and you can select these rows. You cannot do, I don't believe you can do or statements like the question is, but you can do specify the criteria. You can, because notice that you have a match code length that actually can't be that long, so it has to be very specific on individual fields. You have some options here for saying case sensitive, excluding inactive records, and so on, to get very, very specific. So those are two. So it's not quite like you would have it in advanced find in terms of finding duplicate information, because this one also has to run, for example, when it's processing thousands of records at a time during an import. That can significantly slow things down if you're making very, very complex duplicate detection rules. If you need an or statement, it might be better to have two different rules handling it instead. So let me just close this one up. But it was primarily the duplicate detection settings I wanted to show you first there. So I'll go back to my slide deck. Okay, I see I have a question here. Can you easily access data from SharePoint to CRM? So if you are in, well, from CRM or Dynamics 365, if you are, the SharePoint window, SharePoint integration is basically a integrated part of the form. It's an iframe on the form where you can see the SharePoint documents specifically for that record. So the integration or the users can very easily get from Dynamics 365 record to the SharePoint documents. However, if they're browsing through SharePoint, it's going to be a little more complicated getting back to the correct record from the folder on SharePoint back into Dynamics 365. I wouldn't recommend going that direction. If you are using that integration and specifically have documents associated with individual records, then your primary way of accessing those documents, I would recommend, should be through Dynamics 365. All right, so I'm just going to sum up on this session, and then we'll take a few questions afterwards. So we have the review here of session 1. We had an overview of Dynamics 365, what's it for, using configuration settings to control duplicate detection, order numbering, auditing, document management, and so on. We looked at business units and how they provide the framework for the security model. And once authenticated, of course, Dynamics 365 security model is what provides you access to the specific 365 data and features, and then how you can use teams, owner teams, and access teams for more flexibility in user record ownership and, of course, data sharing. And next session, coming on Wednesday, we'll look at implementing the hierarchical security, and we'll look at the introduction to processes and business process flows. So that's kind of the end of this session. So if you guys have any questions here, I'll just start answering your questions a little bit, and you can put them in the conversation window. But that is the session for today. And for you guys, we will be doing a quick test here on the next session. So I've actually just uploaded a PDF with the questions I'll be asking at the end of next session. So if you guys want to practice a little bit, have a little test look at some of the questions, then you can see it there. Some guys who could share the deck that's being used today. The slide deck will be made available after the last session once you've completed the survey. Once you've done that, you'll be automatically sent an email with a link to download the whole slide deck. So the share option, this question, the share option can be used to share a records to team or user. So reason to use access team. So good question. So you can share records with a user or a team. So why should you use an access team, for example? So if you share records a lot, so the access teams, you can say can be specific to the individual opportunity, for example. So you can say this opportunity should only be shared with these individuals, and they'll be a part of the access team. Once that opportunity is either deleted, deactivated, whatever it is, then that access team will cease to exist. So basically, the access team was made in a manner so that you could have dynamically share records with specific users at will without requiring too many resources from the Dynamics 365 environment, because that was one of the challenges of sharing directly with teams and the users individually, for example, was that the security model and the data became extremely complex, and it would take a long time to open up individual records. So the access teams was designed specifically for those situations where you have more dynamically options for who is each individual record being shared with. So that's mainly where it comes in. If you have like a fairly, like not an enterprise size organization, you may not even notice a difference if you just use owner teams instead. But for large organizations, definitely makes a difference. All right, guys. Any more questions? Otherwise, I'll be looking forward to talking to you all again on Wednesday. And we'll get on with it, look at some processes and try out some of those test questions. A question there. Access Teams gives you the filtered list to share the records. I'm not entirely sure what you mean. So an auto-created access team, you would share the record from the form itself and just select the individuals you want to share it with. Whereas you would just create an access team and just automatically share it with those individuals. So the auto-created version is when you don't know, for example, who should have access per record, whereas you can use the access teams. The user-created access teams, when you say you have a set group of people you always need to share the same things with. It doesn't change. It's going to be the same time every time. There's a question about next Tuesday. IST time. Yes. So yes, I am located in San Francisco, California. So I'm on PST. So today is Monday evening. So the next session would be Wednesday my time. So Monday today for me, Wednesday next time, and then of course Monday again next week. So yes, if you are on the other side of the world, that would already be Tuesday. All right, and there's a question here. Can I assign the record to organization level user? Logged user having assigned permission is user level only. So if you have assigned permission, if your assigned permissions are user level only, that means that you can only assign records that you own, but you can assign them to any user that you can see in the system, regardless of who they are. As long as you have access to that user, you can assign them to them, but you can only assign records that you own yourself. So if you assign it to a person who has organizational level privileges to assign, then they can do whatever with it. But they can already do that because they don't need you to assign it first, because they can assign everything in the system. All right. All right, guys, I think that is it. Training material, as mentioned. Once the last session of this class has been completed, you'll get a survey, and then once that's completed, you'll get an email with the slide deck. Until then, you can also go to the Dynamics Learning Portal, log in there, and see some of the material. All right, guys, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to talking to you all again in about 2 days. All right, you guys have a good night.
Thanks, Ulrich. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the audio portion of this session. We're looking forward to welcoming you again in a couple days. Have a nice rest of your day. Goodbye.
Ini mau gerak sana. Mau gerak sana.